The rain on Cedar Lane did not fall so much as it seeped, a fine, persistent mist that blurred the edges of the world and turned the sodium glow of the streetlights into hazy, indistinct halos. It was the perfect weather for a ghost, and that is precisely what Lily Vance had become. The car that delivered her was unremarkable, the agent driving it silent, the process of unpacking her 2 suitcases into the shingled cottage a quiet, grim ritual. The air inside smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and underlying damp, the scent of fresh starts and forgotten ends. Paranoia, her new and constant companion, took root immediately. Every creak of the settling floorboards was a footstep, every rustle of the overgrown laurel hedge outside the living room window a sign of approach. The rules Agent Miller had drilled into her during their long, circuitous journey here echoed in a relentless loop, * establish no patterns. Trust no one. Become forgettable. Her first sight of Gabriel Thorne was through the water-beaded kitchen window, 2 days later. He was a study in muted contrast to the gloom, moving across his own driveway with an economy of motion that struck her as both graceful and utterly controlled. He didn't slouch against the rain, he moved through it, unbothered. He was handsome in a way that felt architectural, all sharp angles and quiet planes, his dark hair trimmed close, his posture speaking of a self-containment that was foreign to Lily's current state of fractured nerves. He caught her eye once, through the glass, and offered a small, neutral nod before disappearing into his own home. It was neither friendly nor threatening. It was simply an acknowledgement of existence, and in her current state, that felt like a minor miracle. Their first proper interaction was born from her own helplessness. The faucet in her kitchen sink, a chrome relic, had developed a persistent, maddening drip that escalated into a steady stream she could not staunch. The plumber promised by the relocation agency was days out. Standing in the pooling water, a wrench in her hand and desperation rising in her throat, she felt the fragile veneer of her composure crack. A knock at the back door made her jump violently. There he stood, Gabriel, holding a package misdelivered to his address. His eyes, a cool, flinty gray, moved from her face to the leaking faucet and back. "That sounds like a defeated washer," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "May I?" It wasn't charm, not exactly. It was a quiet competence that disarmed her. He worked in silence, his hands sure and efficient, while she hovered, offering useless towels. He didn't ask prying questions. He didn't comment on her lack of belongings, the bare walls, the palpable tension that vibrated in the air around her. He simply fixed the problem. When the drip was silenced, he dried his hands on a rag and said, "The seals are old. It'll hold, but the whole fixture will need replacing eventually." He looked at her then, a long, assessing look that made her feel transparent. "New in town?" She gave him the rehearsed line, the name that still felt alien on her tongue. Just needed a change of scenery. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, not quite reaching his eyes. "Cedar Lane is certainly a change." He left then, with another nod, and the quiet that returned was different. It was no longer just the silence of fear, but one briefly punctuated by a moment of human, mundane kindness. The kindness continued in small, deliberate doses. He carried her overfilled grocery bags in from the car during a downpour, his sleeve brushing against hers, a shock of solid warmth through the damp chill. He recommended the better hardware store in town when he saw her staring helplessly at a dead porch light. Each encounter was brief, polite, and subtly reassuring. He was a fixed point in the chaotic whirl of her panic, a stable, quiet presence in the house next door. Agent Miller's weekly check-in calls, full of stern reminders and static, only heightened the contrast. Gabriel asked for nothing. He simply was. Lily found herself, against every instinct and directive, looking for his silhouette in his kitchen window, feeling a fraction safer knowing he was nearby. What she could not see was the other narrative, the dark river running parallel to her own fragile stream of peace. In a city 500 miles away, in a sleek, soundproofed office that smelled of cigar smoke and ambition, a man named Silas studied a grainy photograph of Lily, her old self, smiling, alive, unaware. He tapped the image with a manicured finger. "This is the loose thread, Gabriel," Silas said, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "She's been tucked away by the marshals. I need to know if she's going to fray." Gabriel Thorne, standing by the window with his back to the room, did not turn. He had been summoned not for a violent task, but for a delicate one. He was a cleaner, the best Silas employed, and his tools were not always guns and bleach. Sometimes they were perception, patience, and psychology. His value lay in his ability to assess, to determine whether a problem required eradication or could be managed through more nuanced means. The location? Gabriel asked, his voice devoid of inflection. A town called Brookhaven. Cedar Lane. Silas slid a file across the polished desk. Your cover is established. The house next door is vacant. You are to be a good neighbor. Observe. Determine her state of mind, her stability. Does she talk in her sleep? Does she jump at shadows? Is she the type to crumble under pressure, or to seek vengeance? Your report will determine our next move. Containment, or cleanup. Gabriel finally turned, taking the file. He did not open it. He already knew every detail it contained about Lily Vance's new life. The assignment was clear: infiltrate and evaluate. To become the calm in her storm, so he could learn if the storm within her was dying down, or gathering destructive force. Back on Cedar Lane, the rain eased. Lily, emboldened by a week of uneventful days and the lingering memory of Gabriel's steady hands, decided to plant the small box of petunias she'd bought on a whim, a pathetic attempt to put down roots, however floral and temporary. The earth was soft and yielding. As she dug, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She looked up to see Gabriel watching her from his own backyard, a mug of coffee in hand. This time, his smile was warmer, more present. Optimistic, he remarked, nodding at the flowers. I like it. Her heart, so accustomed to thudding in fear, gave a different, lighter beat. A bit of color, she said, wiping her muddy hands on her jeans. It suits you, he said, and the simplicity of the compliment felt enormous. He paused, as if considering. I was about to make a fresh pot. Would you like a cup? It's the least I can do after commandeering your kitchen sink. The offer hung in the damp air. Every rule screamed at her to refuse, to retreat, to hide. But the loneliness was a colder, more crushing weight than fear. Here was a chance, however small, for a fragment of human connection, for a moment that wasn't dictated by terror or bureaucracy. She met his flint-gray eyes, and in their calm depth, she saw no threat, only a quiet, inviting stillness. It was a stillness she desperately craved. Yes, Lily heard herself say, the word leaving her lips before her mind could censor it. I'd like that very much. She followed him up his porch steps, unaware that she was stepping not just into her neighbor's home, but into a carefully constructed audition. The door closed softly behind them, and the final, fragile barrier between the witness and the man sent to judge her worth to live vanished into the quiet, rainy afternoon. The coffee on Gabriel's kitchen table was strong and dark, a mirror of the man who made it. The room was meticulously ordered, everything in its place, from the chef's knives aligned on a magnetic strip to the books arranged by height on a shelf. It was the domain of a man who demanded control, and to Lily, in her chaotic state, it felt like a sanctuary. Their conversation was a careful ballet of omissions. She spoke of a generic office job left behind, a vague breakup, a desire for quiet. He offered his own curated fiction, freelance consulting in data security, which explained his frequent presence at home, a life that had simplified after years in a high-pressure city. He was a master of the open-ended question, the sympathetic tilt of the head that invited confession without demand. A place like this must be quite a shift, he said, his gaze steady on her as she cradled the warm mug. From constant noise to this. He gestured slightly toward the window and the quiet, dripping street beyond. It's what I needed, Lily replied, the rehearsed line coming easier now. But her eyes, he noted, flickered toward the window too often, not in appreciation of the view, but in assessment of it. A habit of the hunted. He began to weave himself into the fabric of her days with a sniper's patience. A casual remark about the poor lock on her garden shed was followed, the next day, by him appearing with a new, heavy-duty deadbolt and offering to install it. She protested weakly, but the offer was wrapped in such pragmatic, neighborly concern that acceptance felt natural, even necessary. As he worked, she chatted, filling the space with nervous energy. He listened, cataloging every detail. She mentioned, offhand, how she'd taken to sleeping on the couch because the bedroom window faced the street. He filed this under acute hypervigilance. The tests were subtle, clinical in their execution. He left a local newspaper on her porch, open to a section about a federal trial in a city 300 miles away, not her city, but close enough. Watching from his window, he saw her freeze upon seeing it, her face draining of color before she quickly scooped it up and threw it in the recycling bin with trembling hands. Later, when helping her hang a curtain rod, he let a heavy bracket slip from his grip. It crashed against the hardwood floor with a sound shockingly similar to a gunshot. Lily didn't just jump, she dropped into a crouch, her arms flying over her head, a stifled whimper escaping her lips. It was a full-body, trauma-forged reaction, pure and unfeigned. "Lily," he said, his voice soft with feigned concern, kneeling beside her but not touching her. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Are you all right?" It took her a long moment to uncurl, her breath ragged, her eyes wide and glassy with shame. I'm sorry. I'm just a little jumpy. Startled me." "Of course," he murmured, helping her up, his hands firm on her elbows. The physical contact was deliberate. Her pulse hammered like a bird's against his fingers. Severe PTSD. Auditory triggers. He reported that night, via an encrypted channel, that the witness was psychologically fragile, her memory likely compromised by terror. The sight of the act may have been traumatic, but her recall seemed sensory, not evidential, he typed, the blue light of his screen casting his impassive face in a glacial pallor. "She is preoccupied with fear, not vengeance." Silas's response was terse. Accelerate the timeline. "I need certainty, not psychoanalysis." Gabriel felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, annoyance. The subject was no longer just a file, she was a woman who grew flustered when she thanked him, who was trying to grow petunias in the shadow of a massacre. His professionalism, once absolute, developed a hairline fracture. The fracture widened one evening when a sudden thunderstorm knocked out the power. Lily arrived at his door, silhouetted by a flash of lightning, clutching a flashlight with a beam that shook in her hand. She was pale, her composure utterly shattered. The dark, it seemed, was her breaking point. He lit candles, the warm light softening the sharp lines of his face, and she sat on his sofa, wrapped in a blanket he provided, and in the intimate, flickering gloom, the story spilled out. Not the full, factual account, but the raw, emotional truth of it, the alley, the sudden violence, the deafening sound, the sight of a man falling, the blood like black oil in the dim light. She didn't name names or cities. She spoke of the sound, the smell of cordite and rain, the paralyzing fear. "I just ran," she whispered, tears cutting silent paths through the candlelight. "I didn't see who did it. Not really. It was all just a blur of shapes and noise." Gabriel sat perfectly still, a statue of attentive silence. Inside, his mind was a cold, clear stream of analysis. No positive ID. Memory fragmented by panic. Primary emotion is fear, not justice-seeking. This was the crucial data point. Yet, as he watched her cry, the human part of him, long buried under layers of operational discipline, registered the profound cost of that fear. He reached out, slowly, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was shockingly intimate, a breach of every protocol. "You survived," he said, his voice low and rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "That's what matters." She leaned into his touch, a moth to his lethal flame, and in that moment, the assessment became irrevocably tangled with something else. He reported the confession, emphasizing the lack of identifiable detail, arguing more forcefully for containment. Elimination is an overcorrection. She is a ghost haunting herself, no one else. Silas was not convinced. The order that came back was colder, final. "Clean it up." The directive sat in Gabriel's gut like a stone. He paced his sterile home, the image of Lily's tear-streaked face clashing violently with the brutal simplicity of his mission. He was still wrestling with it 2 nights later when he saw the car. It was an unremarkable sedan, but it crawled down Cedar Lane with a predatory slowness, its headlights off. It parked 3 houses down, engine idling. It didn't belong to Silas. Gabriel knew all the vehicles and methods his organization used. This was something else, a local crew, perhaps, or a rival outfit looking to leverage the witness. An unpredictable variable. He watched from the darkness as a figure emerged and began a slow, observational walk toward Lily's cottage. The threat was no longer abstract, it was here, on his watch, a violation of the perimeter he had unconsciously established. A white-hot, possessive fury ignited in him. The decision was instantaneous, made not by the cleaner, but by the protector his charade had willed into being. He slipped out his back door, a shadow among shadows. The confrontation was brief, clinical, and utterly silent. Gabriel was a ghost himself when he needed to be. 10 minutes later, he was knocking on Lily's door. She opened it, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of fear triggered by the sight of him so late, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" she breathed. "I saw someone lurking around your back garden," he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in her rising panic. "I went out to check. I think it was just kids, maybe looking for trouble. I shouted, and they ran off. Probably scared them more than they scared us." He sold the lie with perfect, concerned conviction. He stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders, feeling the tremor that ran through her. "You're safe, Lily. I won't let anything happen to you." She looked up at him, all her defenses, all the marshal's warnings, crumbling in the face of his decisive, protective action. In that moment, he was not her assessor, not a potential threat. He was her guardian. Her hero. She fell against him, burying her face in his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist in a clutch of pure, desperate gratitude. Gabriel held her, staring over the top of her head into the dark street, now empty. The lie was complete. The threat was neutralized. But as he breathed in the scent of her hair, feeling the absolute trust in her embrace, he knew the most dangerous line had been crossed. He was no longer just observing the storm. He was standing squarely in its eye, and the winds that now swirled around them were of his own making. The report he would eventually send to Silas would be a masterwork of omission and misdirection. The cleaner had begun to clean up the scene for her, not for his employer. The assignment was compromised, and in its place, something darker and far more complicated was taking root. The aftermath of the Prowler incident forged a new, unspoken pact between them. Gabriel's decisive intervention became the bedrock of Lily's shattered reality. Agent Miller's voice on the weekly check-in now sounded tinny, distant, a bureaucratic echo compared to Gabriel's solid, immediate presence. The marshal's warnings about trust evaporated like morning fog under the sun of Gabriel's apparent heroism. In her mind, he had faced a tangible threat for her, and that single act outweighed a mountain of procedural caution. Their relationship shifted from cautious neighborliness to a fierce, cloistered intimacy. Gabriel became her sole touchstone to the world. He taught her how to check the locks not just for being locked, but for signs of tampering. He showed her how to walk without making noise on the creaky floorboards of her cottage, a lesson she learned with a morbid fascination. He was reshaping her paranoia into a skill set, and in doing so, binding her to him with chains of gratitude and shared secrets. The power dynamic was absolute, yet he wielded it with a velvet glove, always the steady hand guiding her through the terror he was, in fact, curating. The passion, when it erupted, was inevitable. It was a conflagration born of shared isolation, adrenaline, and his masterful manipulation of her emotional dependence. One evening, after a tense day where a wrong number phone call had sent Lily into a spiral, Gabriel was there, a calm anchor. He made her tea, then wine, his presence a potent antidote to the fear. A comforting hand on her back lingered, a brush of fingers against her cheek became a cupped palm. When he kissed her, it felt not like an invasion, but like a claiming she had silently begged for. It was consummation as sanctuary. For Lily, it was a terrifying, beautiful freefall. In his arms, in his bed, a space as ordered and controlled as the rest of his life, she found a desperate oblivion. The world outside, with its alleyways and gunshots, receded. Here, there was only the weight of him, the certainty of his touch, the low murmur of his voice promising safety in the dark. She was not a witness in those moments, she was desired, protected, seen. He was the lock and she was the key, and in their twisted symbiosis, she felt, for the first time since the murder, truly whole. For Gabriel, it was a ruinous descent. The cold calculus of his mission dissolved in the heat of her. Her trust, so utterly complete, was a poison more addictive than any drug. The taste of her skin, the way her fear melted into surrender beneath him, it forged a connection that bypassed all his training. He, the arbiter of threats, had become the primary threat. He, the master of detachment, was now hopelessly, dangerously attached. During the day, he would send terse, reassuring messages to Silas, weaving a tapestry of lies about her deteriorating mental state and low evidential value, all while physically trembling from the memory of her breath against his neck. He was playing a double game against the most dangerous man he knew, and the stakes were no longer just his life, but hers. The mistake was born of this catastrophic internal split. In the languid, vulnerable hour after they had made love, Lily lay wrapped around him in his bed, her head on his chest. He had drifted into a shallow, troubled sleep, a sleep where his guards, for once, were not just down but demolished. His phone, face down on the nightstand, vibrated with a unique, patterned buzz, the specific cadence denoting a priority message from Silas. Lily, stirred by the sound, reached for it absently, thinking it was hers. The screen lit up as she picked it up. The preview of the message was stark against the darkness. Silas, status update. Is the asset pacified or does the garden still need weeding? The words were innocuous to a stranger. But the garden was the phrase. The one the tall man in the alley had muttered to the shooter just before the gun fired, *10 to the garden*. It was a code, a Mafia euphemism for cleanup she had never understood until this very second, its meaning crystallizing in a blast of ice-cold horror. Her entire body went rigid. The room, so warm and safe moments before, turned arctic. Gabriel felt the change in her instantly, the predator in him snapping awake even through his exhaustion. He saw the phone in her hand, saw the bloodless shock on her face, and knew, with a final, sickening certainty, that the game was over. "Lily," he said, his voice carefully neutral, but it was too late. "Who is Silas?" The question was a whisper, fractured and sharp. He didn't insult her by pretending. He simply sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist, his nakedness suddenly not intimate but vulnerable, exposing the truth of him as surely as the message had. "The man I report to." The confession unfolded not with shouts, but with a terrible, quiet clarity. He told her everything, his voice a flat, relentless monotone that was more frightening than any rage. The assignment. The assessment. The reports. He explained the prowler, not a random kid, but a rival threat he had eliminated. He laid bare the architecture of her new life, revealing it as a gilded cage he had built around her. He was the architect of her safety and the embodiment of her peril. She scrambled from the bed, wrapping herself in a sheet, her body shaking with violent tremors. "You were sent to kill me." "No," he said, the word cracking with a ferocity that stunned her. "I was sent to decide if you should be killed. And I decided no. So this, all of this," she waved a trembling hand between them, encompassing the bed, the coffee, the deadbolt, the kiss in the rain. "It was all a performance? A fucking assessment?" Here, his mask fully shattered. Raw, unfiltered anguish contorted his features. "It started that way. But it isn't now. You have to believe me. Everything I've done for the past 2 weeks has been to protect you from them. From him. From your boss," she laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "You're my neighbor. And you're a monster." "I am," he agreed, his eyes holding hers, gleaming with a desperate intensity in the dark. "But I'm your monster now. Silas is losing patience. He will send someone else, someone without questions, someone who will just do the job. Your marshal can't protect you from them. I can." He rose then, a predator unveiled, but his approach was not threatening. It was resigned, fatalistic. He stopped before her, close enough for her to feel the heat from his body, to see the brutal honesty in his eyes. "You have a choice, Lily. You can run to Miller right now. Tell him everything. And you will be in another box, in another town, looking over your shoulder until Silas's new cleaner, who won't care about your petunias or your nightmares, finds you. Or..." He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek, the touch devastating in its familiarity. "Or you let me protect you. Truly. Not as an assignment. Not as a witness. You let me vanish you myself. I can do it better than they can. I know all their methods. And I stay. Not as your jailer, but as your shield. Your life," he said, the words a vow and a sentence, "is mine to protect now. Even from my own." He opened his arms, not to embrace her, but to offer the space within them. A cell crafted from obsession and lethal skill. She stood, frozen, the abyss on all sides. The government's promise had been a threadbare blanket. Gabriel's was a suit of armor, welded shut from the inside. Her eyes, wide with trauma and a dawning, horrifying understanding, moved from the phone on the floor to his face, to the arms that had brought her both ecstasy and annihilation. With a sob that was surrender and defeat, she stepped forward, collapsing against him. He caught her, folding her into the prison of his embrace, his chin resting on top of her head. He held the shattered pieces of her, his own heart a battlefield of triumph and despair. She had chosen the devil. Not out of love, not anymore, but out of a primal, calculating instinct for survival. The witness was gone. In her place was something darker, a partner in a dance with death, bound to the very hand that had been poised to cut her thread. The line between captive and accomplice had not just blurred, it had been erased forever. The world beyond the windows of the safe house was a blur of grays and greens, a nondescript forest somewhere in a state Lily no longer bothered to name. The air inside was thick with the smell of antiseptic from Gabriel's hastily stitched side wound and the stale silence of their fractured alliance. They were no longer on Cedar Lane, with its pretend domesticity. They were in the raw, exposed nerve of reality, two fugitives bound by a terrible choice. Gabriel had severed his connection to Silas not with a resignation letter, but by going radio silent after neutralizing the last messenger, a blunt, brutal act performed in a gas station bathroom while Lily waited in the idling car, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. They were now a cell of two, hunted by both the kingdom Gabriel had abandoned and the law that sought to reclaim its witness. The dynamic was a study in dark symbiosis. Lily moved through the cramped rooms with a hollow-eyed detachment, a doll whose strings had been cut only to be reknotted with chains. She hated him with a purity that was almost medicinal. She flinched when he reached for her, not out of fear of violence, but out of revulsion for the intimacy that had been a lie. Yet, when headlights lingered too long on the gravel road at night, it was his name she whispered, a cursed incantation. He was her nightmare and her night watchman, inseparable. Gabriel, for his part, treated her with a grim, meticulous care. His tenderness was not born of romance, but of a ferocious, obsessive ownership. He had declared her life his to protect, and he approached this duty as his new primary mission, the only one that mattered. He taught her to field-strip the pistol he gave her, his hands cool and clinical over hers. He showed her how to spot surveillance, how to create a false trail, his lessons now not a manipulation but a genuine transfer of survival skills. He was arming his most precious possession against his own former world. Agent Miller's voice was a ghost in the machine, a series of increasingly frantic voicemails left on Lily's burner phone that she played once, then deleted. "Lily, if you can hear this, you are in extreme danger. The man you know as Gabriel Thorne is a contract killer. We are coming to extract you. Signal us if you can." She would look at Gabriel, who listened to the messages with her, his face an impassive mask. "He's right about what I am," Gabriel would say, turning the phone off and removing the battery. "But he's wrong about his ability to get here before Silas's people. They have a longer reach and fewer rules." The trust was gone, replaced by a cold, pragmatic calculus. Miller represented a system that had failed her. Gabriel represented a predatory efficiency that, thus far, had kept her breathing. The climax was not a grand battle, but a vicious, quiet convergence. Silas, enraged by Gabriel's betrayal and the loose end that continued to fray, had indeed sent a two-man team, professionals who specialized in hard, fast cleanups. By a cruel twist of fate, Miller, using every favor and satellite ping at his disposal, had triangulated their last possible location and was leading a tactical unit to the same remote coordinates. Both parties arrived under the cover of a moonless night. The first sign was the sudden, silent death of the perimeter alarms Gabriel had rigged. He was awake in an instant, a hand clamped over Lily's mouth in the dark. "Now," he breathed, his eyes reflecting the faint starlight like a wolf's. The following minutes were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Silas's men came through the back, quiet and efficient. Miller's team announced their presence with a thunderous knock on the front door, U.S. Marshals. Lily Vance. The house became a deadly triangle. What happened next was Lily's final, damning choice. As Gabriel engaged the first cleaner in a vicious, silent struggle in the kitchen, the second appeared in the bedroom doorway, his gun seeking Lily. From the front door, the splintering crash of a ram echoed. In that fractured second, Lily was not a victim. She was a student of the man who had remade her. She didn't scream. She didn't run toward the marshal's voice. She dropped to the floor, as Gabriel had drilled into her, making herself a small target. The cleaner's shot went high, embedding in the wall. And then, moving with an adrenaline-sharpened clarity, she did what her protector had taught her. She created a diversion. She threw the heavy ceramic lamp on the nightstand not at the cleaner, but through the room's single window. The shattering crash drew the cleaner's aim for a split second, a fatal error. Gabriel, having dispatched his opponent, emerged from the shadows and fired twice, his shots precise and final. In the echoing silence that followed, filled only with the marshal's shouts from the front, Lily and Gabriel looked at each other across the dark room, the two dead men at their feet. The blue and red strobes of law enforcement vehicles now painted the walls in pulsing, accusatory light. Miller's voice boomed through a megaphone, ordering surrender. Gabriel was wounded, bleeding anew from his side. He looked at her, his expression one of exhausted surrender. "This is your exit, Lily. Walk out that front door. It's over." She stared at him, then at the dead cleaner, then at the weapon in her own hand. Walking out meant returning to a life of looking backward, of being a piece of evidence, a name in a file, forever waiting for the next threat the system might miss. It meant denying the part of her that had just acted, that had fought, that had chosen a side in the dark. She moved, not toward the front door, but toward him. With a fierce, brutal strength, she hauled him up, slinging his arm over her shoulders. "The cellar," she grunted. "The tunnel to the storm drain. You said it was a last resort." A ghost of his old, cold smile touched his lips, tinged with something like awe and horror. She was choosing the abyss, and she was choosing him to share it. Together, a murderer and his witness turned accomplice, they vanished through a hidden panel in the floor just as the front door gave way. They moved through the damp, claustrophobic darkness, the sounds of the world above, the shouts, the confusion over the bodies, fading into a muffled rumble. They emerged into a cold creek bed a quarter-mile away, where a nondescript car, one of several Gabriel had cached for such an eventuality, was hidden. As he slumped into the passenger seat, pale from blood loss, Lily took the wheel. She started the engine and pulled onto a dark, backcountry road, driving not toward any hope of salvation, but into a shared exile of their own making. The final scene was not one of sunlight or peace, but of a different kind of settling. They were in a small, rented cabin in a place of towering, indifferent pines. Gabriel's wound was healing, tended by Lily with a clinical detachment that was its own form of intimacy. They spoke little. They were bound not by love as the world knew it, but by something forged in blood, betrayal, and a mutual understanding of the dark. They were two halves of a sealed unit, a closed loop. He watched her as she stared into the fire, her face no longer that of the frightened woman from Cedar Lane, but of someone who had glimpsed her own capacity for darkness and had not looked away. She was free, in the most terrible way imaginable. Free from the Mafia, free from the marshals, free from everything except the man beside her. And he was bound to her, his life's purpose narrowed to this single, consuming point, to maintain the silence of their private, haunted world. They had not found a happy ending. They had found an ending, full stop, written in shadows and sealed with a choice that could never be undone. The story of Lily Vance, witness, was over. The story of whatever they were now had just begun, in the quiet, watchful dark. Want to descend deeper into the shadows? If you were captivated by the twisted bond between Lily and Gabriel, if you crave more stories where love and danger intertwine in impossible choices, subscribe to our channel. We explore the darkest corners of romance, where loyalties are tested, morals are blurred, and the greatest threat is often the one you can't live without. Join our community of dark romance readers for regular journeys into the heart of forbidden passion. Subscribe now, and never miss a story.